Good morning, everyone. It is May 24th. It is Monday, and this is Flutter News. So last week, the big event was Google I/O, and I'll touch on a few things that I thought were really great. There's lots of great stuff to check out there, so I recommend you go look at it yourself. The Flutter team also released a Flutter 2.2 article that has a great summary of things they talked about at I/O. And then something not from the Google team. A Flutter developer from Latvia shared her story of how her company built the CrochetApp. And then I have a weekly funny at the end, and we'll wrap it up. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first video that we're going to get into is the What's New in Flutter. And the two presenters in this video were Zoe Fan and Chris Sills, and they're product managers on the Flutter team. One of the first things they talk about is they had made a lot of performance updates. This has obviously been a focus for them. It's one of the first things they brought up. They talked about reduction in startup memory, decrease in database initialization time, FPS increases on low-end phones, which is pretty great. And they also had one call out to specifically on iOS page transitions, which is pretty detailed when you think about it. But there has been a lot of talk about improving iOS's Flutter animations. And so it's great to see them working on it. And I know they're working very hard on it. It's something very, very important for them. And I'm really hopeful that they'll get it figured out very, very soon. You have to remember, Flutter is so young, and iOS and Android were, if you go back and look at their version ones, they are not what they were today, and they've had a decade. The fact that Flutter's having to work on some performance issues, particularly with UI, not surprising. So it's great to see that they're working on it, and I'm hopeful for the future. They also talked about the update to their payment plugin, which is pretty great. If you got to make money somehow, and so monetizing your app is a great way to do it. And so the fact that they have an update here is encouraging. Last week we talked about the developer survey and how one of the greatest concerns when adopting Flutter is Google actually going to support this long term? So they made a big point to highlight all of the Google apps that use Flutter and chose to use Flutter. And you can see here, there's quite a few. One quote I have here from Chris Sills: as we worked with the Google Pay team, we found several areas, examples of Flutter performance that could be improved across the board. It's kind of an interesting dynamic because in a way they're Google apps and Flutter's a Google platform, so they want to help each other. But these apps also kind of have our best interest in mind too as developers. Not that the Flutter team doesn't, but these people can kind of be advocates saying, hey, we don't build Flutter, but we use Flutter too. Just like these other people outside of Google, and we have opinions as well. So I think that's great. Okay, this video here was very interesting. Building a desktop design language with Flutter. Now, if you don't know what a design language is, I didn't really know either. But Todd here gives a great example of trying to bring an old legacy app to Flutter, but still using the old 1980s look and feel. Maybe it's the 90s. I don't know. It was pretty old. But what I love about this video is that it's an excellent introduction to how Flutter widgets work under the hood and how we can leverage that architecture to build our own widgets. It's very insightful, something very interesting that you can kind of whet your appetite. And then if you want to learn more, there's plenty of documentation about it. But this was fantastic, and I really appreciated his input into all of this. And the last one I'm going to highlight here, and again, there are plenty of great videos. I mean, just look on the right and you can see all these great videos on Flutter. But this one I thought was really interesting, kind of more from like a team perspective. But this is Building Platform Adaptive Apps by Kevin Moore. And this is just, like I said, it's just got some great insights. And one thing he says that he recommends is, if possible, designate an advocate for each platform you're targeting. So if you're targeting iOS and Android and macOS and web, have somebody on your team that actually uses those platforms on the daily, and let them help say, hey, this actually doesn't feel quite right. Like on Android, this should be here, or on web, I expect it to be here in Safari. And the other person could say, oh, but on Chrome, it's like this. So you can build each experience to fit the platform. So for a great summary that you can just read on Flutter 2.2, here is an article by Tim Sneath. Flutter is now the most popular framework for cross-platform development. He said that it comes from Slashdata's Mobile Developer Population Forecast 2021, which I couldn't find this article, so if you can find it and just maybe post in the comments, that would be awesome. I would love to see it. For now, we'll just have to take their word for it. Big congratulations to the Flutter team for that. We all appreciate it in their community, and we think this is pretty fantastic. So moving on, talks a lot about null safety, which we know about. And for me, coming from Kotlin, Swift, and Ruby, this was a huge relief to have that. Let's see, going through here, more Google projects are being done. Many companies are bringing Flutter to their platforms. So Toyota has their cars, Samsung's Tizen. So that means you can build for their TVs and smartwatches, and there's other ones as well. So that's exciting to hear. So again, very high level, but again, something you can just kind of read through really fast. Okay, the last article I want to go through today is this one about CrochetApp and kind of how they built it. This is from Daria, and she gives some great insights into what they did, how they made their decisions to use Flutter and Firebase. She goes through each component at a high level and talks about how they made the decision to go with each tool. And I think she did a fantastic job, and it's worth a read, especially if you're wanting an example of what to use when setting up a Flutter project with a backend support. One thing I really like that she said that I can sympathize with is she says, I come from about 5-year-old native Android background, and boy, do I not want to return to it. And then she says, I hope my managers are reading this. I think that's fantastic. I come from an Android and iOS background, and I can totally understand where she's coming from. Flutter is definitely a great tool, and I feel like that was kind of Google's overarching theme was the Flutter team is dedicated to improving quality. And when they say quality, it's quality coding experience as well as quality first-in-class apps. And I totally feel that when it comes to Flutter development versus the more native developments. So, excellent article. Give it a look. Daria, thank you so much for posting this. And finally, the weekly funny. This full stack developers be like, and then you have a dog that says, I wish I could fly, a fish that says, I wish I could walk, a little chick that says, I wish I could swim, and then you have this duck. And he's just all smiles. It cracks me up. The smile is just cracking me up. But there you go. So I feel like Flutter is kind of the same way. I mean, for me personally, again, Android, iOS background, I always wish I could just write once and be done with it. I never really cared much for a lot of the cross-platform solutions before Flutter. And so this kind of helps me feel like we're as Flutter developers, we're the duck in a lot of ways. So that's a wrap. That's Google I/O. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that this information was helpful. If you have anything that you want me to add to this show, tweet me at BQMckay or use hashtag Flutter News, and I will take a look. Have a great week.